Let me try that again. Brian Bortree, welcome to this exclusive Heaven's Metal feature video. Look forward
Awesome.
to about my new book, Rockstars on God, Heaven's Metal Magazine, all things music, God ministry, and whatever else that you have in mind.
Doug, I'm so excited to talk with you today. Thank you.
You bet. Well, this is essentially the Brian Bortree show today, but I'd like to start off with a few questions for you. So,
oh yeah,
what are your thoughts on the book Rockstars on God, Volume 3, Good, Bad, or Ugly?
Okay, Doug, like I said in my email to you, I forgot because I read these whenever you had them in the magazines. I forgot how like efficient and effective and like streamlined your approach was. I just forgot, reading back through these, it's like, first of all, they're not too long, not too short. The thing that amazes me, you see, I've got my tabs on the stuff that I've read so far.
Nice.
It amazes me how you're like so to the point. You'll ask a simple question. I also noticed that you don't do a lot of like a setup or like an agenda. Hey, we're going to talk about this, then we're going to talk about this. You kind of hit a question out there, hit another question, and you jump around. And I see how you're able to just get them to give you different information. The other thing I noticed that you do is, I'm a computer person. I'm not a interviewing journalism person, but I notice you'll give them sometimes 2 or 3 questions at the same time that are kind of related. And I guess that's because you're not sure what they might want to grab onto. So you might say something like, how is the writing process for you? Is that difficult? And who does most of the songwriting? And how was it done on your last album? So that kind of gives them 3 different things they could grab onto. So that's some of the things I noticed. But Doug, what I really wanted to say to you, and I thought this when I was always reading the magazine back in the day, is when you get to that question about what do you think of Jesus Christ, you just put it out there. You don't introduce it. Hey, we're going to talk about something a little different today. This might be out of the ordinary. You just hit it. And I'm assuming that's intentional, right? You don't want to build it up. You just want to ask it and just see what comes back, right?
Yeah. It's kind of like, I wish it was on TV. I always kind of envision it as being like a TV show, and I'm always trying to keep it rolling in case it gets tense. But that initial reaction is quite telling, I think, especially to an important question like that. So not having any setup for it gives you that opportunity. And sometimes you get the, excuse me, or can you repeat that question, or did you just ask me this? Kind of adds to the entertainment value in a sense, and also gives you more of a temperature of the conversation, I guess.
Yeah, it's really good. And I noticed they answer like completely all the time. They answer, except I did watch the video interview 2 hours yesterday that Brad did with you. And you mentioned your most difficult interview, Prague. So I went to that chapter and I just read that yesterday. And that's the only guy that I can remember having kind of resisted the question. Everybody else seems to just kind of answer with whatever.
Yeah.
And the other thing I wanted to tell you is, you always you always 9 times out of 10 you'll ask that other question. What do you think of his claims to be the way, then the truth, and the life? So you get more specific. And then I see from there, you may hit in the C.S. Lewis, liar, Lord, lunatic. You may hit even reliability of the Bible, existence of God. You may or may not hit those things, depending on where it goes. But I always appreciated that back in the day, how direct that question was. And again, reading these again is just, it's really cool to see whatever your approach is that you've honed over the years of doing it, it works. So that's one thing I wanted to tell you, is the approach works, and it's really cool to kind of read through it again.
That's really cool. I had a similar experience when I started editing the chapters or interviews for this book. I hadn't read some of them in 2 decades, and I forgot how good some of them were. I had vague memories of a lot of them, and the little piece that I remembered wasn't exactly accurate sometimes. Like even the Prong interview, there was some ground we covered that was it was quite surprising, given the fact that it got so tense and it was almost about hanging up on me kind of vibe.
Yeah.
We got into some honest discussion there, and some of the interviews, like in the Def Leppard, for instance, was one that I was like, I don't remember hitting somebody so hard like I was street witnessing, like not wanting them to get away without making a decision for Christ one way or the other. And I almost took that approach with him, and it was like it surprised me after all these years. I'd forgotten that I'd kind of gone there with that guy.
That's awesome, man. I'm gonna read that next.
Cool.
Okay, what's your next question?
My next question is if you had some favorites, what your favorite interviews were and why.
Okay, so I told you in my email. I hit Dream Sabotage because I just saw TSO. I'm thankful for that over Christmas. Um, and I and I also wanted to hit some of the '80s metal because it's a decade of decadence, right? I wanted to see what the real hardcore '80s party bands were gonna say, So and then I hit Slayer because I know one of the guys in there is kind of a Catholic, and so it's like I've heard the questions posed before. In fact, how do you as a religious person deal with the lyrics written by, I can't remember, is it Tom Murray? I can't remember the other guy's name.
Yeah,
So
Kerry King.
And what else did I hit? Well, I hit the prog, and I hit what's the other one I hit here? Let me look here. Okay, that was Slayer as Sabotage. Yeah. What did I like? It's interesting, Doug. The other thing, like for example, Cinderella, I could tell you were kind of heading in one direction, and he wasn't quite tracking with exactly what you were saying, but you still made some points, and he was still thinking about some things. With Sabotage, it's interesting when they did and I haven't read the TSO interview because it's longer, and I kind of got distracted to do some other things. I don't know if you watched during COVID. I watched TSO's online COVID thing that they put out, and it was cool. It was really cool. And then at the end, in the credits, they had this song "Believe," that I am the way, I am the truth, like clearly religious. And I'm not familiar with their Sabotage catalog, and I was like, what is up with this? And so I checked it out, and I know Paul O'Neill's religious and a Catholic and things like that. So I was curious to just see, let's just say, how religious or how Christian the themes might be. Like I said, I didn't get to that interview yet, so I'm curious to read that one as well. The other comment I'll make is, especially on the Cinderella, I loved how you kind of get into you and him together kind of got into the history of. I mean, he was like, grunge killed it. Nirvana killed the industry with one song. And I like that history kind of reflection. So it was nice to kind of get into a little bit about what's happening to them at the time, which is always fascinating for me.
Yeah.
So yeah, I liked them all for different reasons. Like I said, I'm going to be reading the whole book, obviously. I started with those few, and I'm going to hit the rest of them. It's great.
Yeah, the Cinderella one was fun, and like I said, one of those interviews I hadn't read in 20 years, and that was in 1995. So it was definitely on the heels of Nirvana had already staked its, planted the flag in the musical landscape, and the new music revolution had begun. And so this was a good, 4 years of alternative music taking over the hair metal and Sunset Strip bands like Cinderella, even though they weren't from there per se. But it had, those years had sunk in already, so I got some real reaction from the guy. But I was quite surprised that that he had some faith, and he acknowledged Jesus Christ and what he stood for and whatnot. And so that was kind of I'd forgotten that interview went there, that somebody was kind of tracking with me on theological parts of it, and was willing to talk about Jesus and his role in society, and how countercultural he was. And so that was kind of fun. And the Trans-Siberian Orchestra, I can't wait for you to read that one, because for two main reasons. But one is I found when I went back to the printed version of that was in the Heaven's Metal fanzine, which was a side publication of HM back around 2004 and onwards. It became like a magazine that came out the month between the 2 months that HM magazines came out in. And it was to be continued in the future, or be continued next issue, and it never continued. And at first I panicked. It was like, okay, so I need to find that interview. Surely I transcribed the whole thing at one point, but it turns out I didn't. I guess that's one reason why it was to be continued. Maybe I got caught in the deadline and said, okay, I just need to finish it here. I'll get back to it later, and I never got back to it. And so I scrolled through all of my artifacts and files, couldn't find it, but I found the micro cassette tape. And so I got my little foot pedal out that helps me transcribe. And I was able to transcribe a good 10, 15, 20 minutes interview that had never been heard before, never been written. And Paul O'Neill has since passed away. And so an interview with him is like gold, because like, what did he have to say? And we
Yeah.
got into such, I won't spoil it for you, but we got into a lot of spiritual things. And prior to that, the second thing I'm excited to you to see is his reaction when I asked him, because a lot of times I want to talk to people like I came back to faith as a prodigal son in my college years. So I was
Right.
on the University of Texas in kind of a scholastic environment, kind of an antagonistic environment to faith and Christianity. So I learned to try to communicate in a way that a person that didn't hold my viewpoint could understand me. And I wouldn't alienate them. I wouldn't use words like redemption or the blood of the lamb or things that Christians immediately know and key on, but they may not be familiar with, or the nuances of those words. And so I approached it like, okay, so why did you pick such a divisive holiday like Christmas to focus your music on? And he was like, divisive. And we really went back and forth. He really wouldn't let me go until I defined why I was saying Christmas was divisive. And I said, well, Christianity is divisive, and that's got into the Jesus Christ made a unique claim of himself that's very exclusive and very divisive. He said he came to bring a sword and he would divide. And so the claims of Christ leave no room for whatever you want to believe, or no room, no middle ground there. And so that part of the interview was really fun. It was really kind of cool. He goes, slanted question. Why do you say it's divisive? And so he was a very astute interview subject, a fun guy to interview. And at times I just asked the question and let him go, because he talked about, like I said, I wouldn't spoil it to you too much, but he dissects art. Good art, bad art, and great art. And he kind of goes into examples of each. And that was a real fun one.
That's awesome. Yeah, I remember I followed your video blog as you were kind of going through this process, and I remember you were talking about the lost interview. In fact, I was going to ask you today, which one was that again? So I'm going to check that one out for sure. But Doug, you just made a comment that I wanted to ask about. You just made a comment. You learned as a Christian to have a dialogue with people that wouldn't turn them off. Let me look at my notes here. The one I wanted to ask you. I'm a pretty detailed person, right? So,
love it.
This is your role. You're very upfront about your faith, meaning you're not hiding. You're just a matter of fact about it. That you're a Christian. You're a Christian journalist, Christian heavy metal, and all that kind of stuff. So it amazes me that you can just interact with the bands. And I'm assuming it's not just in these interviews, in other settings as well, where that's like the Holy Grail, right? How we can be a Christian in the world, but not of the world, having a pleasing aroma. I know Christ and the cross can be divisive, but I mean, not being a threat to people.
Yeah.
I can be a Christian. I'm not a threat to you. I'm here to help. And perhaps if we dialogue, you can learn something from me and I can learn something from you. I'm thankful I was raised in the church, but I was raised in the Christian bubble, so it's hard for me to really interact sometimes with people that are not of faith, because my fear is, well, they're going to just be turned off and closed-minded once they find out that I'm a Christian. And so there's no real witness there. So I guess my question for you is, how do you think you've been able to develop that nuance of being matter of fact and upfront about your faith, but not putting up barriers, not being a threat to people, and yet clearly discussing religious things if necessary? How do you think you've been able to develop that?
I'm not sure how to answer that question. I'm not sure how that was developed in me, or how intentional it was. Probably not very intentional by me, but maybe intentional with my father, who was disciplining me and forming Christ in me, and that was on his agenda, and maybe I was malleable to some extent. I know that in some ways, like you and I could we could really get deep and we could start to pinpoint areas in your life and my life where we're not totally surrendered to Christ. And we can push and push and push till we get you to the point where you're like, okay, so this is out in the open. I've got a choice to make, and am I going to let what decision am I going to make? Um, and I've seen it in action, and I've seen abuses of power in the church, and I've seen situations where someone got pushed into beyond their comfort zone. And so what I'm kind of getting at, I don't feel like I'm articulating it too well, but it's like there's a comfort level that we all have with each other when we're in and around each other. And like even with your family, like on a holiday, in some close-knit families, there might be really tight affection, like they might be huggers and affectionate people. They might be able to share what's going on in their lives, but there's not often that place where somebody's pushing you for a decision. They're pushing you to deal with maybe compromise in your life, or they're pushing you, or they're trying to. And some people, I think, when they interact with other people, they're looking for that one area that they can push the finger on, and maybe that's their calling, and maybe God's gifted them to be somebody who is like I don't know, like a discipleship EMS team that comes in, kind of goes and blows. But so for me, part of it, I think, just goes to that desire to be comfortable around people and to kind of treat them the way that I would want to be treated. Like if you came and started talking to me about, okay, you're wearing a black T-shirt, Doug. Why black? Are you depressed? Or why the Tigers of Pantang? They're secular. They sing about sex. Why would you promote them? You're going to lead kids to hell because of that T-shirt. Yeah, so it's almost like an attack, like you have an agenda. You want to change my mind about that. And obviously, I think with a lot of people, you're going to hit a defensive mechanism. Someone's going to be defensive about that, or they're going to have to start defending themselves, and that's not a very comfortable place to be. So those times come and go, and you kind of read that into a situation. You read the room, you read the conversation, you read the tone, you read the relationship and the depth of it, and all those are factors that go into how deep and personal and I don't know, maybe finger pointing or finger pointy we get with each other. It's often a place where even close friends don't go there too often. When they do, there's a time and place. And like, if I came to you and I said the magic words, Brian, I'm looking for some advice here, and I explained some sort of problem, that just gave you an open door to speak to it. So I kind of look for those open doors, and I don't push them open, because that's going to make the person uncomfortable. It's like, hey, I didn't want to talk about my diet right now. Why are you going there? Who gave you permission to do that? Who were you? And so avoiding all that, it's just kind of, I guess, maybe my upbringing or growing up and trying to come up with my own definitions of what tact was for me and how I wanted to interact and be thought of. And I just think there's an effectiveness to it when you're a gentle approach, gentle answer turns away wrath, kind of thing.
You just said a great phrase, Doug. You said you look for the open doors, but you don't push them open. That's probably the perfect way to summarize it.
Yeah. So it took a while to get there to say that.
No, it's great. Thank you.
But I want to hand the microphone over to you. I've already kind of have, but first I want to thank you for this privilege of taking your questions and answering them. And I'm honored and grateful. So what would you like to ask me?
Well, Doug, I'm honored to talk to you. I mean, let's be honest. In our scene, you are a key figure, and I know you're kind of a down-to-earth guy, but I'm just saying. I just want to say that, you and Pastor Bob, right? And our scene's changing. Ted Kirkpatrick passed away. Michael Bloodgood. I saw Les Carlston in Immortal, and I talked to him. This 2 years ago. And I said something to him along the lines of, you're now the elder statesman in the Christian metal scene. So Doug, from one fan and reader and fellow Christian brother, I just want to say to you that I'm honored to talk to you, because you've been such a key part of the scene and of the ministry and all this stuff. So I did want to say that to you very much.
Well, thanks. It's very encouraging. It's funny that and I got remarried in my 50s, and my wife doesn't know anything about Christian music, Christian radio, except for like what's on the radio now, like worship stuff and Christian rock. And so it's kind of funny that, and I always tried to keep my identity from being separate from what I did, but it usually mingles with us fairly tightly when we do something for like a career like I did for almost 30 years.
Uh-huh.
But it's kind of funny. She has no reference point, not into it, doesn't. So it kind of keeps my ego in check, because it's like times in me I want to say, hey, God did some really cool things in my life, and I want to share them, but with no reference point. But it's very encouraging to hear that, and it's just super encouraging to think that God actually used you and helped
Oh,
you encourage somebody else.
totally. And on that note, okay, Doug, I'm gonna try not to be total fanboy, but I couldn't help but go down to the storage unit and get my boxes of HM. So
All right.
I want to tell you, I mean, okay, I've got, here's the original logo, right? Heaven's Metal.
Oh yeah.
I mean, look, okay, however many there were. I mean, I was a
Good
subscriber
condition
for a long time. The fanzine, the HM, the everything. Here, Holy Soldier, right?
Issue 33.
Crucified. Okay,
Yep.
I saw Mark Solomon at Cornerstone. Was a 95, I think, his first show post Crucified.
Wow.
Hey, here's Dave Mustaine, Megadeth. Then I noticed in the pile, here's one. The logo is a little different, and I don't quite remember. It's the only magazine I have that has that particular logo. Was that just
Okay.
like a really experiment, or this
No,
doesn't
that
seem
was
like
one of
a
the older
special issue?
logos.
Magdalene.
The
Do
very
you
first
remember that little
logo.
logo change?
Yeah, but that was an early logo. It used to have a frame attached to it. Underneath the metal, there was a frame that went down to the bottom of the page and came across and
Oh
connected.
yes. Okay.
And some of the early fanzine copies that were done like a Xerox machine, it was a legal size sheet of paper, 11 by 14, that folded in half. So it was a little bit wider than 8.5 by 11. And so back in those days, the first 3-4 years of the magazine had that logo.
Okay, hold on. Okay, good point. This is issue 26
Yep.
of
That would have been
I don't see the date on here, but look.
91, I think.
Okay, look, I got the fanzine too. Now I don't know if this was the original fanzine or the revamped fanzine, right? Fanzine.
Yeah, it's kind of revived in the 90s.
Yeah. There's Michael Sweet solo. But you know what? I have the reprint. At one point, you sold or gave out the reprint of the original first copy with Striper, and I thought I had that in here somewhere.
You were at Cornerstone 95. That would have been the 10-year anniversary. We printed them just for that.
That's how I got it. How I got it. Man, I thought I had in this pile here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm gonna have to look for it. Yes, I saw Mike Knott in LSU. I was introduced to Mike Knott in LSU at that show, which was awesome. Somebody turned me on to Mortification with a cassette tape.
Wow.
Yeah, man, I thought I had that in here. Okay, now the other thing I'll tell you is, okay, I've got. Okay, then here's the next logo, right?
All right. Yep.
Changed as you were describing. How you were told by the A&R rep, hey, maybe you should consider changing it, So here, Scattered Few, Bride, what else is on here? I see Skillet is on here a lot. I love Skillet.
Yeah.
I mean, look, I got them all. Here's King's X, Ty Tabor. I know it's like your favorite band. Oh yeah,
I designed that cover.
What's that?
Ty designed that cover, by the way.
Oh yeah, he designed his own cover.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I also, here you go, 10th anniversary issue.
Mm-hmm.
There you go.
The only fold-out cover we ever did.
Okay. Oh yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, now hold on. Times change, right?
Yep.
So now HM itself, right? Okay.
Yep.
So I've got them all. Some of them are not opened. Some of them have sticky notes that I didn't get. I want to look at this. I want to look at that.
Oh wow.
There's POD.
Yeah, that had 4 different covers on it. I don't know if you knew that.
Living Sacrifice. What'd you say?
I don't know if you knew that, but that POD issue number 91 had 4 different covers. We had a cover
Oh,
with each
really?
individual member of the band, and we had them randomly distributed through the mail to subscribers and also to retail.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep, I got this one then.
Yep. On the barcode, it'll say A, B, C, or D, depending upon which member of the band it was.
That's awesome, Doug. Okay. Here's more HMs, right? This is the new stuff, you know. Okay, but I'm a print guy, right? So
Yeah.
when you were doing the rumblings and I saw you were like, listen, everybody, you were totally upfront about everything and you tried all these creative ideas. You're like, listen, everybody, first we're going to do website, then we're going to do the discus or whatever the thing flips around, and then we're going to do PDFs. You know, I saw you really trying every possible avenue. And I'm a print guy, right? So I'm the guy that like I love the PDF, right? So I got the PDF and I would print it out, right?
Oh, nice.
Okay.
There it is.
So I could have it sitting to read. So this is In the Midst of Lions. This is
Yeah,
Christmas,
2013.
December 2011, issue
Oh, wow.
151.
Okay, yeah. That was a thick issue, too. I had really cool art interview with Mute Math in there.
How do you remember all this stuff?
I don't know. I just spent so much time on it, I guess. Like I could play a game with anybody. Tell me, give me an issue number, and I'll tell you which band was on the cover, you know?
Doug, it's awesome. Oh yeah, I mean, so I wanted to also the other thing, because you mentioned it in the interview with Brad, I forgot about the sampler CDs, right? Okay,
Oh, yeah.
so here's my I mean, I loved getting the sampler CDs. That was a huge thing back then, to get these, to find out, because you couldn't just iTunes it. Obviously, no Spotify. So I got
Yeah.
my sampler CDs off the shelf. I wanted to tell you that. I got your Cool Tunes little
All
cassette
right.
you did, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Side A, metal. Side B,
Yep.
aluminum. Cool.
There you go.
I got some VHS stuff around here too. So anyway, I wanted to tell
Nice.
you, you know, your labor was not in vain. And as you were saying in that interview, you saw the value of the Christian community, the value of discipleship. And for me, the things that I like the most about the magazine, the news was big for me and the reviews were big. And then of course the feature articles, depending on which band I was interested to check out. I mean, you had so much stuff in there. And there's other things I liked about the magazine too. So I just want to tell you, your labor was not in vain. And I had these in my storage unit. I couldn't resist bringing them out to show them to you today.
Well, thanks, man. That's a very good boost of encouragement. And
That's awesome.
it's so wonderful to hear something like your labor was not in vain too. It's that means a lot.
Oh, absolutely was not. So
You know,
yes, thank you again for the gift you gave us and all your years of ministry doing it and still doing it. You know, you're still involved obviously in Heaven's Metal and etc. Okay, so you said I can ask you some other questions.
yes, sir. This is fun.
Okay. I guess just since we were talking about the book, I'm curious for you that are there any bands that you really wanted to have that chance back then to talk to? Or actually, I'll do your interview style. Are there any bands back then that you wish you could have talked to about faith because you had a particular interest in their faith? Or are there any bands that you wish you could talk to today because you're curious about their faith for some reason? You have a personal curiosity in it. Any bands that you never got to interview or that you would like to interview if possible because you're curious about their faith response?
Wow. Yes, and yes, and yes. Just this last week, about a week ago, I got another press release about Marilyn Manson. He had a new album that came out, and I picked that up, and I asked the publicist, you know, is he doing any interviews? And I got told no, Marilyn's not doing any interviews. I'm like, darn it, because that's one back in the day that I really wanted to interview. And like I said, I just tried a week or so ago to interview him because that would be a fun one.
Oh yeah,
One of the
for
questions
sure.
that I thought I would start off with him is, what do you hate about Jesus Christ? Or why do you hate him? and give him I don't know if I would actually still use that question, because he would probably say he doesn't hate him, and he would probably want to talk about. But he, very much, he was kind of like an antagonist in the scene.
Yep.
He knew how to poke people, and he would like poke at people, and he had some experiences in the Christian subculture with a youth group and stuff, whatnot, apparently, and so that would be fun. I always wanted to interview Glenn Benton of Deicide. He has like an upside down cross, seared into his head. What do you call it? Branded into his forehead. And so that would be fun, because it's kind of fun sometimes, like with Trey Asgathoth of Morbid Angel. He and I kind of went back and forth with our philosophies battle each other. He believes in chaos, and the chaos existed before order. Because in the beginning darkness was upon the face of the waters, and God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. So he takes that sacred text to mean that chaos was there before, chaos ruled before, and this light thing was like a come along, Johnny come lately to the scene kind of situation. And so, and I kind of stood toe to toe and traded blows with him a little bit, and I made some statements, I think, about Jesus Christ proclaiming that he would, have the final victory and stuff. And so, so that those kind of situations can be very tense, and you need to be on your guard. Like speaking with anybody, I think you need to pay attention. You need to be on your guard and be ready to and willing to answer any question. Some people are really good, and they've picked, like the pro-choice people. One of their arguments they pick is, if they press me on don't hurt the baby, don't hurt the baby, don't hurt the baby, we can press them on, well, why don't you adopt somebody? Let's go open up my phone here. Why don't we call the adoption center and get you to adopt a child right now, Doug? And one thing you can do with that is you can say, well, let's compare our checkbooks. I support these child sponsorship ministries. Let's say an average, now it's like $50 a month, but let's say an average of $30 a month for 20 years. How much money have you spent that much money on your pro-choice, on families and kids and women, because one of the counteractive arguments that a pro-life person can make to that very astute, precise counter from the pro-choice side is, okay, let's compare checkbooks. I've actually put my money where my mouth is, so to speak, and I'm helping children that are alive here after birth. How about you? And so anyway, but some arguments you really need to be ready for. Need to be ready to answer. Maybe ready to say, I don't know, and maybe because none of us know everything, and there's certain areas like you want to get into metaphysics with me, and my physics 303B class and college might be the highest I could go, and there's people that know way much more than I do. So anyway, that would have been fun talking to Glenn Benton of Deicide. I would really like to talk to the Killers. It went over my head. I should have been paying more attention that the Killers have some sort of spiritual influence or Christian impact on who they are as a band. So there's a modern day band I would love to interview. And then there's of course there's bands that I really like the band Muse. And he's a very thoughtful guy, kind of very political, politically motivated artist. And of course, I'd love to interview some heroes like Robert Plant of Led Zeppelin. That would be amazing. And one thing I noticed, a kind of a funny story, is I haven't seen myself become a fanboy with any of these interviews. And I think the reason why is because I had a career in journalism, and all the people I was interviewing had become rock stars after I had already become an adult, and I'd already started a career in journalism. So the fact that I was talking to the singer for Cinderella or whatnot wasn't, it didn't blow me away.
Interesting.
But I was at a toy store in London, England, called Hamleys, I think it's called. And it's like a 4-story toy store. And anyway, I ran into Joe Perry and Tom Hamilton of Aerosmith. And I found myself going, gosh, funny meeting you here, and saying goofy fanboy type comments like that, because they were my heroes when I was 14, 12 years old. And so here I was kind of seeing them in that light. Um, and so I think that attitude helped me, because being a fanboy, it would be like the Chris Farley episode on Saturday Night Live where he interviews Paul McCartney. It's like, that's not going to help you pull off a good interview. But it's funny that when I ran into Aerosmith, it was like, oh, so this is what it feels like to be a fanboy in front of your rock star hero. You kind of get flustered a little bit, and so that's kind of fun.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. Well, I think you also hit on a concept there. You said something along the lines of, or no, you didn't say it, but when you're interviewing these bands, you're respecting them. It's not a gotcha. Like the guy from Prague was like, "You're going to trap me," and you're respecting them. You're not interviewing them to gotcha or make them feel bad. You're respecting them as people, and you're dialoguing with them. So I think that's a key motivator in being able to interact with people. You're not doing it out of some personal agenda, I guess.
Yeah, and part of that might just be practical too, because this is my career, or was my career, and I want to do an interview next week. I don't want to blow my credibility with the entire music industry by stepping over the line with one person, because the news could spread fast, and you could get hampered by that. Totally. I did have the publicist for Roadrunner Records who was listening in on the conversation while it was happening, and he chimed in right after it was over. Says, "Yeah, blah blah blah. We liked the interview. It was great, but the part about religion, we want you to take that out." And I was like, "Well, I'm not going to do that." And he goes, "Well, if you don't, you're never going to do another interview with another Roadrunner artist ever." And of course, he backtracked on that threat or that promise, but still, that was an example of like, if you could win a battle and lose the war if you do something stupid or go over a line. So that there's practical reasons not to do that as well.
That's good, Doug. Okay, I know we have limited time, and I wanted to shift a little more towards a serious topic. I'd like to get your thoughts, and I want to prompt you on the state of Christian metal as it relates to ministry. And then I'd like to throw a couple of ministry ideas at you that I've been thinking about. Cool. I'll preface this by saying, I mentioned in my email, I graduated high school at 86, so it was all the old school Christian metal bands, White Cross, Believer. It's what I call the ministry bands that are there for the mission. They're sleeping on the bus. Bloodgood's a perfect example. Most of them will give an altar call, so Bloodgood, White Cross, Deliverance, bands like this that existed for the mission. I call them the ministry band. One Bad Pig, I saw them back in the day. They have a giant lighted up cross. Bands today, Chaotic Resemblance, I saw at Immortal. Seventh Day Slumber, I've seen them at Uprise Fest more than once. They'll have some type of come forward. We really care about you. Share his testimony. And believe me, I'm not a person that says you have to sing about Jesus. And personally, an artist may choose to be a quote Christian band, may choose to be a quote band of Christians. I'm fine with all that approach. I'm just saying, from a ministry perspective, a lot of Christian metal obviously came out of the 70s, res band, and the focus was mission, salvation, as you mentioned, secondarily discipleship, like Petra. So my question for you is, and now I think today you have the modern day bands that are in the world but not of the world, like Striper has always been. Skillet is out there. They'll be on Warped Tour just as much as they'll be at Uprise Festival or Creation Festival. Question for you is, from a ministry standpoint, where do you see Christian metal is today? However you might want to define ministry, but just as you look at the arc of where things started and where things are today, what comments do you have on where you see the state of Christian metal ministry is today?
Well, I think that the scene is kind of almost is all but dead in a sense. It's still alive, but the structures that supported it are gone. Like the retail distribution, Christian bookstores are gone. There's like hardly any left. Christian radio and their 4-hour rock shows on Friday nights, those are gone. Christian record labels, we used to do any one of those magazines of HM you've got, there was about 2 to 3 dozen album reviews, and they're represented by about 10 to 15 different record labels. Well, out of those 10 or 15 labels, there might be 3 left. Tooth and Nail's still going, Face Down Records is still going, but you don't walk into Christian bookstores because they don't exist anymore and see them on the shelf. You don't see hardly any retail space for CDs
Right.
anywhere. So the structure is gone. So and also the touring circuit has kind of had the rug pulled out from under it because of promoters disappeared, Christian music festivals disappeared, and magazines disappeared, the radio disappeared.
Wow.
So all this structure has been pulled away. It changed overnight. And so the whole thing with like digital files and music, the way music is listened to, and people don't buy albums anymore as much as they used to. So artists themselves have had to reinvent themselves and how they can monetize and have any sort of career. So all that's changed. And there's still, both sides of the coin are still there. And there was a tiny little gap that ever started widening between ministry bands and music as art bands. And like you said, I agree with you. There's room for both in the body of Christ, because art in and of itself glorifies God, whether it has a sermon attached to it or not.
Absolutely.
But anyway, that gap is ever widening, and I attribute that to one of the things you pointed out. And I'll also reference this movie Electric Jesus, which I think everybody needs to see. And it kind of showed this. There was this fictitious band called Fire Escape, and the main character was at a fire escape show when he gave his life to Christ. But kids in high school, the whole rock and roll dream, they see a rock band on stage, they see the girls scream, they say, I want to be that, I want to do that. And in the Christian context, they saw Mylon Lefebvre preach a sermon, an altar call, kids come forward, and a res band, Glenn Kaiser, preached the fiery sermons, and they saw that and said, I want to do that, because they felt the power of God.
Yeah, right.
They felt the music. They saw the reaction. They wanted to do that. Well, in the 90s, you had bands like MXPX and King's X, and some other bands be very, very successful with a different mindset of this art for art's sake, and their art reflects who they are, and the fact that they happen to be Christians came out in their art as a matter of fact, just because the sweat comes out of your pores, your faith comes out of your art. It's just kind of a natural thing. And kids saw them on stage and said, I want to do that. And so that's why the gap, I think, started widening ever more, because the bands that were successful were taking this art approach. And that was the thing that was being elevated, and more people saw that, wanted to be like that. And so it reproduced after itself. So I think that both sides still exist. Bands like Skillet are still very much upfront about Jesus. And going back about 15, 20 years, maybe close to 20 years, the band Under Oath used to play at mainstream venues. Like I saw them at Stubbs Barbecue in Austin. And somewhere during the set, Chris Dudley, the keyboard player, would say, hey, we're not here to judge anybody. We're no better than you, but we're Christians. We believe that Jesus Christ made a difference in our lives. Next song. That small thing, I'm going to cry right now. It's so exciting when anybody points to Jesus and kind of from a pure heart and just shines their light, even for a moment like that. Okay, next song. Boom. That's a huge witness. It's so cool. Unfortunately, really with that band, they're all atheists now. They all deconstructed their faith. But that was an example of going out there in the mainstream and just shining your light, matter-of-factly, not trying to come up with a cute way to say it, but just say it and move on. Skillet, I think, kind of does the same thing. They're playing to mainstream audiences. They play big festivals, and I think people know they're Christians. So it's still in existence. Can you hold on a second?
Oh, yeah, sure.
You're banging on the door. One, and I'm on camera.
Sorry.
No worries. And I'm back. So I think it still exists. But the whole music, what we're referring to back in the good old days where we had Christian concerts and there was altar calls, by and large, most of those existed in the context of Christians performing to Christians. And they would bring some of their unsaved friends on.
Bring their unsaved friend to hear cool music that sounds like what they like.
Yeah. What a good friend of mine said, a guy named Philip who lives in Little Rock and kind of grew up and around a living sacrifice. He says a lot of the Christians were eating the bait because this radical music for Christ was great bait, and there's a hook in it, that hooked you for Christ, and fishing for men, souls got saved as a result of this radical music. But Christians, by and large, we were enjoying that music, And so maybe we're at fault in some way why this scene changed. That the original model didn't get used the way it could have or should have, or maybe things just changed for a reason. Maybe God really wanted this whole worship revolution to take over. Maybe the Christian metal scene got idolatrous. I don't think there's a clear cut case for any of these hypotheses,
Mm-hmm.
but there may be some truth in them somewhere. But by and large, because the whole music scene has changed, and because the pandemic happened, we're climbing back to where we were before, where there's a lot of live music. But I don't think it's still returned to the pre-pandemic levels where there was so much live music going on. So I don't know if that answers your question. I know I touched on a lot of little
Oh,
parts.
that's awesome, Doug. Very, very cool analysis. Thank you. Thank you. I'm most enthused nowadays with bands like Skillet and Striper. Well, Striper's always done it, in the world but not of the world. They never played Christian festivals. They
Yeah.
always had a mainstream band opening for them. In fact, I heard Michael Sweet say that more than once. That is the model that we did on purpose. So being in the world but not of the world, Mortification's another great one that comes to mind. So yeah, Doug, thank you for that answer. I feel like we're out of time. I don't want to take more time than you had intended for these Skype interviews. So maybe I'll save my other questions for when you put out volume 4 and with the Kickstarter for volume 4, or maybe there'll be another time we could connect somehow.
Well, if you want to, if you got a few more minutes, why don't we try to get as close to an hour as we can? We'll just cap it.
I mean, I would love it. I don't want to,
Okay.
yeah, but thank you.
Go for it, brother.
You're very gracious. Well, along those lines, and this is more of a personal question for me that I'm interested in. I told you I'm an administrative project manager type. I would love to get into music ministry, metal ministry, from an administrative or coordination type mindset, behind the scenes type of thing.
Very much needed skill set.
Well, that's the question I have for you. I mean, I know there's different roles there. You could be the band manager, you could be the booking agent, the promoter. You could own a venue where you bring bands through, or maybe you could just sign up to work with a band. I know there's all different roles in the ecosystem. I wanted to throw out 2 ideas I had for you because, I went to see Striper. Hey, you see it, right? 40th anniversary in Philadelphia. I saw him for To Hell with the Devil, 25 years in Allentown. And, people know they're Christians. They know what they stand for. I thought, it would be so cool if they had some mechanism where they could say, hey, light touch. Hey, you guys know we're Christians. He always points to God. There's some people here standing around in yellow and black green shirts that would be happy to pray with you if you have any questions. When I go see Seventh Day Slumber, he always I saw him 2 months ago. He said, everybody take a step back. He gives testimony, and then he doesn't really give an altar call, but he does give an altar call. They come forward. It'd be awesome if there was some mechanism in place. So 2 ideas. One idea for you would be like the Billy Graham model. Okay, a band would partner with a nonprofit ministry. The ministry would provide prayer counselors at every tour stop, connected with local churches. Anyone, and the band would call out anyone that comes forward for prayer. Someone prays with them, and they get follow-up cards, and then they get them plugged in for discipleship. What would you think about a model like that? And do you think it would be even possible to logistically coordinate that? This would be a separate organization that would partner with certain ministry bands that they believe in, and then provide that follow-up and those prayer counselors, as that would be their ministry, so that band could say, not only do we talk about Jesus and provide hope, we have a place that we can make sure these fans get followed up with beyond just talking to us after the show. What would you think about that kind of ministry model? And please, if you think it's not a good thing, I would like to hear from a seasoned veteran, if something like that would even work in the ministry.
I think it's a great idea, and it's got a lot of really cool benefits to that model. There's a few things that point out that are challenges for that model, and one of those is finding a partner for ministry, especially if you're like a traveling evangelist, or let's say, a traveling band. You've got to find a partner in each city. So one of the models you talked about was, ministry in one place. You also talked about a model of a ministry that traveled with the band. So
right, yes,
you take away that aspect of it. But the initial challenge is to find a partner you trust. You've got you're Striper, let's say, and you've got a vision, and your vision is something that God gave you, and it's successful. And and on a bigger level, the fact that you're submitting to some authority is a thing that keeps you grounded, and the thing that kind of makes your ministry biblical. And so, but if your church authority is not have the same idea for this vision of a ministry that travels with you, it's very hard to find a partner that you're on the same page with. That it kind of has to be a God thing, where God brings two visions together and says, these support each other, these line up. Because if you were doing your thing and somebody else wanted to come along with a good idea, but you didn't quite like all the aspects of it, in essence, unless it's really God pulling on your heart to compromise, come to a middle ground, and submit to their vision, most people aren't going to want to do that. They feel like you're going to water down what they're doing, or you're going to change that's not really what I feel called to do, or where my mind is focused, or what I think is the best use of us, or whatever. And also not even just a spiritual aspect. That's not what I want to do. So you're facing that.
Very good feedback.
And two, I've been on the tour bus with Michael Guido, who was and I've been in a venue in Austin when Stryper first came out of California for the first time. They toured Texas. They did like 5 or 6 shows. Guido was there. He was their band pastor, and then I saw Guido with POD and went on the bus with them and saw one of their quiet times or their devotion times together before they went on stage. And he also toured with DC Talk. Super awesome guy. One of those people like Phil Keaggy, they walk in a room and you can kind of sense, you can kind of feel gentleness as if it was some sort of like sliceable bread, or you could almost feel a kind of some of the personality of Christ, some kind of an attractive an aroma. That's like you want to be like, I don't know what it is about you, but I want to hang out with you some more because I'm just enjoying being around you. He has one of those personalities, and I think one of the benefits that he brought to Stryper, and what some bands need, this isn't for the audience, this is for the band to stay together. They're on tour, they live in a hotel or a bus for months on end, not seeing their family, sometimes not seeing their wives for a long time. It's kind of a weird existence, and so they need extra help just to stay focused and grounded in Christ. So the ministry aspect for a situation like for a band pastor is to keep the band grounded. Now you're talking about the audience and feeding the audience or giving the audience something to gravitate towards. One of the other challenges too is like with a youth group who has, come on, we're having a pizza night, come on in. You got to stay for the sermon and then we'll give you pizza. They kind of feel tricked, like, okay. And some homeless ministries do that. We're going to feed you a full-blown meal. We're going to give you some haircuts and some clothes, let you use the shower, but you got to listen to us preach to you. And a lot of folks, they know that's the drill. They're used to it and they do it, but it's almost like baiting them in a sense. I don't want to use that term again and connect it with what I was talking to earlier necessarily, but it's almost like being tricked into, we want to preach to you. We're going to force you to hear us if you want this little treat. If you want to get a piece of candy, you're going to have to hear a sermon. So there's that vibe that could come across with every audience. As innocent as it sounds to, look for the person with the yellow and black shirt or in the back if you want to talk to somebody. There's ways to come to do that, and sometimes just making it a real low key, like saying, hey, if you want to talk to us, we'll be at the merch table. Some bands that are bigger won't do that because like Stryper, I don't know, they might do that nowadays, but it's on some levels when you have an arena with 5,000 people in it, you're probably not going to go to your merch table and stick around for 4 hours to talk to everybody that comes, because you really don't want to leave some people that waited in line to talk to you because you're tired and you want to go. Yeah. So, but having the opportunity where somebody can get something else or something more is a great idea. But there's all these logistically, there's all these challenges, and just philosophically, there's challenges in taking somebody that's already doing it and then bringing along this new idea to what they're doing. Anyway, it would be an idea that you'd have to sell to them. And say, because one of the reasons why Pastor Bob is around today and Sanctuary got started is a bunch of kids kept getting saved at striper shows. They would go to the local church and be turned away because they had long hair and they smelled like smoke, and you know, the clothes they wore. And they needed discipleship, because getting saved is one thing, but growing in your faith is another thing. And that's what we're called to do. We're called to make disciples who make disciples who make disciples. Sanctuary started to fill that need. That's solely the reason they started.
That's
and
cool.
They're still around today because they kind of keep using that model. So there's a need there, and this is a good idea that could work, but it's got the odds of it working are stacked against you a little bit. Those are some of the challenges that come to mind. I still think it's a really good idea, and I think that you know, people are moved by music, and
totally.
when music can be point them to Christ and have some sort of person to go to ask questions or do follow up with, is pretty darn important. That's one thing that's missing from a lot of traveling things. And that's what the Billy Graham, they would come into town a month before and find churches that would network with them and say, okay, you're going to have counselors come from your church, your church, your church, your church, your church, and we're going to feed them and invite them to your churches. So when we leave, these people that got saved will have someplace to go. They don't feel like, oh, what do I do now? They got somewhere to go. So it's a real need.
Doug, your comments were very good, and the challenges, thank you. You know what you made me think when you just said it? Billy Graham, massive logistics, massive organization, massive fundraising. It's almost like, instead of saying, hey, I want to partner with XYZ bands, build trust, can I come along beside of you? It might be the opposite. You establish a ministry that does its own fundraising. It has the go ahead, the advanced teams, and then it puts out the feelers to bands to say, look, if you're a metal ministry band and you are concerned about follow-up and you are concerned about your fans, we'll look to take you on and partner with you, in the sense that if the organization is large enough and doing a good job, it could be of a service to the band that may want to come to them and say, yeah, we want the infrastructure you can provide, because we are trying to do that just at the merch table and it's not enough. So it might be the opposite. You start with this large ministry that has a bunch of fundraising, and then certain bands may be interested to take advantage of it. I don't know, but you're giving me some food for thought here.
Cool. Back in the day, in the early 2000s, there was a nonprofit. It'd be more accurate to call them a nonprofit than a ministry, but it was a ministry called To Write Love on Her Arms.
Okay, I've heard the name before.
A girl who was cutting herself, and she got saved because somebody reached out to her, and or maybe the girl died and they named the ministry after her. I can't remember, but anyway, they used to go to Warped Tour, which was like a traveling festival that went from city to city to city, and there was a tent of To Write Love on Her Arms where people could get practical help, and believers were part of that organization or running that organization, and it kind of was presented as a nonprofit in kind of a threatless way that would reach people that might have been leery if they saw the word ministry on the tent, or had a little cross that said Jesus first kind of thing. But they helped a lot of people, and that was kind of a thing where they kind of, and some bands took them on tour. I think Switchfoot, brought them on tour one time, and they had like a booth at their show, and they could awesome. So some stuff like this has been successful and has been done in the past. It's
cool. Thanks, Doug. I think we're out of time. I really appreciate your thoughts, your feedback, your stories, your perspective. So, thanks for answering those questions. I guess I'll just end with one final question. Is there any potential in the future where you might want to circle back and do interviews today for the website? Circle back with some of the bands you did in the past, or current bands today? Is there any thought of current interviews with this? That's my final question for you.
Yeah, and I actually have done that. The new format for like what we're doing right now is the Skype interview, and people use Zoom and Teams as well. But as soon as we're done and we hang up, that recording gets finished, and it's in my download folder, and I can upload that onto YouTube and put a title page on it, and boom, it's live. And so that's the new format for feature articles. where like if I do a feature on somebody, I'd much rather get Michael Sweet on a Skype call and do the interview and have it live, 10 minutes after we're done, than to sit down and go back and transcribe every word off of that micro cassette tape and lift my foot pedal and have it rewind a little bit. And he said this, and he said this, and then he said that. That takes a long time. And so the convenience of video makes it so much easier to do logistically. And the couple that I've done in the past, and I asked them the same two questions, was two different members over a course of about a year, 6 months apart, maybe, was the band Sabaton. And the Sabaton's almost like a Christian metal band. They're not affiliated with any religion per se. I don't think they really necessarily believe in Christ, but they're like a Christian band because they're an agenda band. All their lyrics are about military war history. They don't want people to forget history, and they focused. They've done like 2 or 3 albums on World War I, for crying out loud. But all their lyrics are about battles and famous people and generals and military leaders in history, and that's what they're all about. So it's kind of like it's a similar parallel to Christian metal, because Christian metal is all about Christ, and all the lyrics are pointing to Him. So, and they're kind of like that in a secular realm. But I interviewed both the two of the members, the singer for that band, and I think the drummer for that band. And so those are on the Heavens Metal website. And so
cool.
I've done some other interviews with some movie people, but yeah, as time goes on, the more opportunities open up, there will be some more of that. So
cool. I'll check those out on the site then.
Right on.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Brian. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and thank you so much for supporting the book. And thanks for all the encouragement you shared with me today. God bless you.
Oh yeah, God bless. Thanks again, Doug. I'll enjoy the rest of the book too. Take care.
Right on.
Thank you.